We are now recording. And I'm going to share my screen. Where is it? This one? Perfect. All right. So, we've gone through some theories in ethics. We started, right off the bat, jumping in to talking about the ethical issue of abortion, or ethical issues concerning abortion. The point of that for this whole class is to kind of help you understand, because philosophy can get really down in the weeds. Like, I don't know if you've ever had a good philosophical conversation with any of your friends, but you usually end up like it's hard to come up with answers. And usually philosophical questions end up like so out there that you don't know what to do, where to go, what to say. And then it's always unclear whether or not any of it matters, right? Like if you ever have like watched The Matrix or thought about the question, which will come next in this class, of like skepticism of like, can you really ever know anything? Can I know that I'm not in the Matrix right now or something like that? Whether or not it matters in the end seems neither here nor there, right? Unless the Matrix is real and somehow like you can be like Neo and get sucked into the real world and then have to fight the robots that created the Matrix, right? Does that really matter? I don't know. I'm just going to keep living my life. Well, guess what? There are some philosophical issues that fucking punch you right in the face. They're right there, right? They're here. They're things that you have to actually deal with in your day-to-day life. And here is one that is both like matters to all of us human beings that have sex and will maybe eventually have children, right? As well as an issue that matters like morally to a lot of people and legally to a lot of people, the issue of abortion. That's why I start off with this, because I want to show you that there are some philosophical predicaments that matter to your everyday life. And then we'll go, as the rest of the class goes on, right? More and more broad, more and more sort of interesting, maybe even more narrow in certain respects, particular philosophical questions that are so much more out there and so feel so much less like important, but they really are important to decide because they kind of all tie back to things like this. So your first writing assignment is to try and answer basically these prompts that go over the two abortion papers that we read. The first is the violinist argument paper from Judith Jarvis Thompson, and the other one is a paper by Dan Corman on the future like ours argument. And what I want you to do here is follow very specifically the instructions of the prompt. What does that mean? That means do exactly what the prompt says here, right? The prompt says here, right? It gives you an example, it gives you the argument, and then it asks you to explain the argument in your own words. To do that, that involves describing the violinist situation, explaining the analogy between the violinist case and a case of pregnancy. Hint, it's particularly a specific kind of case of pregnancy, right? The violinist case is one where the violinist is, you are kidnapped and plugged into the violinist. The case of pregnancy that's relevant here is a case of pregnancy that is the result of rape. And then explain what Thompson thinks about this premise. That is why the two cases are analogous. And then discussing the plausibility of the premise here, or discussing you need to discuss the plausibility of premise two here, because Thompson basically just takes it as given that it's permissible to unplug yourself from the violinist. That's what you need to do for this section, this first one. This is basically like, I want you to internalize what I have explained in lecture and then figure out how to say it yourself and then regurgitate it back into this text box right here. This is just sort of to let you know, one of the most important things you can learn how to do in all of college and for the rest of your life. Um, it's basically like it's twofold. One is reading a piece of text, some sort of written thing, and fully internalizing what it says, like understanding it fully. And then being able to translate your understanding of it back into an explanation or a series of words, a series of sentences, paragraphs that clearly state it. Um, and being able to do that in a talking way is one great thing to be able to do. Public speaking is nice if you can do that sort of thing on the fly. That's awesome. But being able to do it just in an actual written way where you get to craft the writing and be organized as best as possible is really important. And that second part, getting it from inside your head, your own understanding, down onto the paper, that's the hard part. That's the hard part. And that's the part that takes a lot of practice, right? Hopefully, you're already pretty good at reading comprehension, right? Reading something, understanding, internalizing what's going on there. That's something that they do pretty good at teaching you in high school. What they don't do so well at teaching you in high school is taking your comprehension and then regurgitating it back into a new written piece of information. And that's what I want you to do here. Basically, this is just what's called explication. You need to understand what was going on in Thompson's violinist argument, uh, and my description and explanation thereof. And then I want you to regurgitate all of that information right here in a relatively organized way, following this little prompt right here. If anyone has any questions about that, please let me know right now, because otherwise I'm going to sort of move from this into the second one, because all of this, is sort of the same. It's just the second one is the more important or interesting thing where you get to do some thinking, and then I'm going to explain what's going on in the argument.
Really quick.
Mhm.
So just to clarify, so the first premise is basically explaining the idea that the cases are analogous, and then explaining the sort of position on the violinist.
Yeah,
And
so the first thing I'm asking you to do is to describe the case and then explain the analogy.
okay, and then the second case is then to like explain the conclusion that you can unplug yourself from the violinist, and then um therefore you can have an abortion in some cases.
Yeah. So yes. So premise one here says if it's permissible to unplug oneself from the violinist, then it's permissible to terminate a pregnancy that is the result of a rape. This premise is a conditional premise. It says if blah blah blah, then blah blah blah, right? What that means is that this is connecting this claim here that it's permissible to unplug oneself from the violinist to this case here, it's permissible to terminate a pregnancy that's the result of rape, and saying that there's a kind of dependency relation between them. It says that, well, if the first one is okay, then the second one's got to be okay. And that explanation is what you kind of want to do here in explaining both the violinist situation and the analogy. So the violinist situation, you're kidnapped, you're plugged into the violinist, no fault of your own, somebody else's fault, not even the violinist's fault. You go to you wake up, you go to unplug yourself. The doctor's like, wait, don't do that just yet. If you unplug yourself, violinist will die, right? You sit there, you think to yourself, okay, violinist's gonna die. That sucks. But do I have an obligation to stay plugged into the violinist simply because, the violinist has like a right to life or something like that? Uh, According to Thompson and a lot of people, the thought is no, you are not morally obligated. It would be very nice of you to stay plugged into the violinist, not something you're morally obligated to do. It's not something that morality requires of you. And that's really like her main point. Morality doesn't require that you stay plugged into the violinist, even though it would be very good for you, good of you, be helpful for the violinist and good of you to stay plugged in. Now, Same idea supposed to apply to the case of a pregnancy that's the result of a rape. Um, this is going to be a person. We can even assume that the fetus is a person, according to Thompson, right? We don't have to be committed to that, but Thompson, for the sake of her argument, is like, yeah, let's assume that just in case, right? Because she thinks she can make her argument just as well, assuming that the fetus is a person. Um, and so then she wants to say, yeah, like assume it's a person, assume, you got pregnant from the resulting from a rape, you're plugged into this thing, right? um if you decide to have, well, like, can you disconnect from the fetus, right? Is it morally permissible? She thinks um morality does not require you to stay plugged into the fetus. That is, it is not impermissible. It would be very nice, it'd be a very good thing of you to do for the fetus, the eventual person that will, the fetus will grow into. But it's not something that she thinks is morally required of you. And so there's supposed to be this analogy between the two cases. The morality is the same for both cases, right? And that's why she's trying to point to, even though the cases are super disanalogous, right? One case is a wild case where you're being kidnapped by musicians or music lovers and plugged into a violinist, right? Like, that's so wild and out there. Whereas like a case of pregnancy due to rape is something that happens every day, which is sad. Right. But the point here is not supposed to be like, these cases are so weird. How could they possibly? The point here is supposed to be like, look, this case, the way that I've set this case up, this violinist case, is so that the morality works this way. And in this case, it seems really obvious that you can unplug yourself from the violinist without violating the moral code. And if that's the case, and this case is in some sense morally analogous to a case of pregnancy due to rape, then it's got if it seems so obvious that you can unplug yourself from the violinist, then it should be pretty clear also that yes, you can unplug yourself from a fetus in the case of a rape. Um, Whether or not that is actually plausible is going to be up to you. That comes next. We're going to talk a little bit about how you might deny that, but um, I'm sure I went into way more detail than you asked the question, Lucas. But is there anything else beyond that?
Oh no, thank you. That helps
Cool,
a lot. I
great.
appreciate
So just on
appreciate
this first part, that's what you're trying to do. Um, explain that connection, explain that analogy, and then you can explain here too. So like Thompson discusses for a little bit the permissibility of unplugging oneself from the violinist. Some people might in the end think that that's not actually that plausible, just on the basis of the fact that the violinist has a right to life. But that is a deep issue. If you have a right to life, do you thereby have a right to whatever it takes to keep your life like going? Um, that seems kind of implausible because there could be a lot that it would take to keep your life going, right? Like, you know, just think of like situation in like imagine like a hospital situation in which if the hospital like somebody so to take like a situation where like one person is dying, and if all of the hospital's resources went towards that one person, they could keep that person alive. Right? Does that one person thereby then have a right to all of the hospital's resources? Well, no. But if that one person has a right to life, and the right to life thereby somehow creates a right to all those resources, well, then it should seem that they do. But that's part of Thompson's point is like, well, no, look, you can have a right to life, but if the means to continuing your life takes a certain, process, or takes, there's a lot that goes into continuing your life, and you don't have a right already to those things, then it doesn't seem like we violate your right to life by not letting you have the thing that you don't already have a right to, right? um yeah, so that comes up. Let's just move on to the next thing, and then I can get into more details here. So part two of this first one on the violinist argument here. Suppose you believe the conclusion to Thompson's argument is incorrect. So this is like, um, we're kind of doing a parody here, right? First, I'm giving you the Thompson argument, and she obviously believes it. And then I'm asking you, if you were to try and think of like a way in which you might disagree with Thompson, how would you do it? Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side with the future like ours argument for Corman. I'm going to have you explain the argument and then, see how Corman thinks about it and why he agrees with it, and then try and come up with a way in which you could disagree with the Corman argument. So in this one, suppose you believe the conclusion of the Thompson's argument is incorrect. Given that the argument is valid, which means that if the argument's premises are true, then the conclusion just follows. That means that you have to reject one of the premises if you disagree with the argument. It can't be that you just say like premise one's fine, premise two's fine, conclusion's bad. That doesn't work in this situation because of the way that the argument is set up. So if you think that the conclusion is false, then you have to deny one of the premises. Either one of the premises also has to be false. So here you should choose the premise that you think is the best one to reject. Explain why someone that believes Thompson's argument fails would reject this premise and how they might do so. In other words, give a reason for thinking that either premise one or premise two is incorrect. Explain why that reason is plausible and how accepting that reason allows one to reject the conclusion of Thompson's argument. Again, this is like a really good exercise to imagine like what someone who disagrees with someone like might think. So even if you agree with Thompson's argument, this is a good exercise for you to sort of expand your ability to think from different angles and sides. Okay, so what do you do here? Pick one of the premises, particularly the premise that you think is the least plausible, and then come up with a reason for thinking that the premise is false, and then explain that reason or explain why it's plausible. Basically, it's like you're trying to come up with something like a counterexample or just some facts for taking that claim to be false. Now, what are the claims? Well, it's either of these two premises that you can try and deny. I'll start off with premise two. I was kind of just doing that, right? So Thompson's argument says if it's permissible to unplug yourself from the violinist, then it's permissible to terminate a pregnancy that's the result of a rape. And it is permissible to unplug yourself from the violinist. So it's permissible to terminate a pregnancy that's the result of a rape. If you think maybe that it's not actually permissible to unplug yourself from the violinist, you'd need to explain why. You could give a type of argument to this point and say, look, the violinist's life matters a lot. The violinist's life is extremely valuable. The violinist has a right to life. Maybe you could give something like a utilitarian style argument here. Look, the 9 months that you're giving up versus the rest of the life that the violinist is going to live, that's a neither here nor there, right? Like 9 months versus like probably another 20 to 50 years. That seems like this like your suffering, if it even is suffering, your discomfort for 9 months versus this guy's like living for 50 years, that's creating way more happiness in the world. Plus, all of these violinist fans are going to be happy and he's going to make a lot more music. He's going to be indebted to you for the rest of your life. So, he'll probably make your life pretty good after that as well, if he can. So, yeah, maybe so there's lots of different ways that one could say, actually, no, it's not permissible to unplug yourself from the violinist. It would be morally wrong to unplug yourself from the violinist because blank, right? And blank is what I need you to fill in. And there's lots of different moral ways to try and explain this, right? One of them, yeah, like being the violinist has a right to life. One of them being there's, a moral theory like blah that says we shouldn't kill people unnecessarily if we can avoid it, even if it incurs on us some discomfort for a certain period of time, something like that. All right, that's one way that you could deny this argument. That's not the most plausible way. It does seem pretty plausible for most of us, I think, to think that, like, yeah, morality doesn't require of us to stay plugged into the violinist. We can unplug ourselves. But premise one is a little bit more difficult. Premise one claims that if it's permissible to unplug yourself from the violinist, then it's permissible to terminate a pregnancy that's the result of a rape. The whole point here is to, with this premise, the whole point of the premise is to try and connect these two different cases and say that they're morally analogous. You can say, no, I don't think that those two cases are morally analogous. You can say, look, there's a moral difference between unplugging yourself from the violinist and unplugging yourself from the fetus. And then it's up to you to sort of explain what that moral difference is in the case in which it allows you to unplug yourself from the violinist, but disallows you to unplug yourself from the fetus. Does that make sense? So the way that you can deny premise one in this section down here is to reject this conditional statement by coming up with a situation in which it is totally okay, morally speaking, for you to unplug from the violinist, but it is totally not okay for you to terminate a pregnancy that's the result of a rape. What kind of possible situation could that be? Well, you just need to come up with a morally relevant factor that differs between the two cases. What morally relevant factor differs between the two cases? Well, first, there are lots of morally relevant factors that don't differ between the two cases. One, in each case, you were forcibly plugged in, right? You were forcibly plugged into the violinist. In the other case, it was a pregnancy that was the result of a rape. So it was like you didn't have a choice there. So that's morally analogous. Two, we're assuming in each case that both the violinist has a right to life and that the fetus is a person and has a right to life. So you can't say, well, the fetus isn't a person, right? Also, that would be weird. You can't be like, oh, the fetus isn't a person, so I can unplug from the fetus, but I can't unplug from the violinist because the violinist is a person. That's just not a good argument. So what kinds of things can you say here? Well, something that people have said in the past is, look, the violinist is in no way related to you. The fetus is basically your child, and because of the fetus is your child, there is an automatic moral responsibility that you have. There is this like natural responsibility, this natural moral connection between you and the fetus that you don't have to the violinist. And so it's okay to unplug from the violinist because you don't have this already baked in parental moral obligation, whereas you do have that to the fetus. Interesting possibility. Like weird, difficult one because yeah, like okay, so this fetus is the result of a rape, but it is something that is partly you. So maybe you're morally obligated to stay plugged into it. That there's more details that can be gone into there. If you are an above and beyond type student, there's this move that comes right after this kind of argument that I'll just sort of mention here. So this is like you've given a disanalogy between the two cases, right? You've got the violinist and you've got the fetus, and you're not related to the violinist, but you are related to the fetus. And that's supposed to be the thing that like makes it morally different, where you can unplug from the violinist, but you can't unplug from the fetus. Well, I can just change the violinist scenario so that you are related to the violinist. And I can make it really analogous again so that it seems sort of weird. Like, imagine you and the violinist are long lost twins, right? You were born and you were separated at birth. You never knew that you had a twin, but it turns out that the violinist was your twin, and you didn't even find out that the violinist was your twin until you got plugged into them, right? It turns out that that's basically the reason that your, blood type is so perfect for fixing the violinist's kidneys or whatever. Imagine that scenario. Now, you've never talked to this person, you've never met this person in the same way that you've never talked to or met your own fetus, or the fetus that's growing inside of you. But they are related to you. They're your long lost sibling. Now, do you now have an obligation to stay plugged into the violinist? Well, it complicates things, right? If the violinist is your long lost twin, um, I mean, generally, if my own brother was sick and I had to give up a kidney, I'd probably do it, right? Um, but am I morally obligated to? I don't know. So am I now morally obligated to stay plugged into the violinist? Um, Even though he's my long lost, or now that he's my long lost brother. I mean, like, I'm slightly more inclined towards saying, yeah, it's not as permissible, but really, I still think like it doesn't change the situation that much to say that he's my long lost brother. I mean, I don't know this man from Adam, so does it really give me a moral obligation? At this point, I'm not really sure that it does. It would be nice, and it would probably be even, better in some respects now to stay plugged in, because now I have, you know, a sibling that I didn't know I had, right? My family just grew larger. But do I have to? Am I morally obligated to? Um, Not so sure. So the point of all of that was just to explain that you can, if you come up with a way of denying premise one that is a disanalogy between the two cases, you should always kind of check and see if you can't just go back to the original story and change the case a little bit so that the analogy still holds with your new disanalogy, and see if the results are the same. Um, that last, 2-minute explanation though, that's for you students that are trying to go above and beyond, because that's like a worthwhile thing to think about. But it's complicated. It's a lot. This whole argument is a lot too. So like, for any of you that are like, what in the world is going on right now? This is so much like information and so hard to think through all this. Don't worry. Things get easier as this class goes on. I just threw you into a pretty complicated argument right here, right off the bat, because it's a it's a big, interesting one, and this is such a cool argument and such a funny like analogy and explanation that Thompson gives when thinking about the violinist, and it's sort of famous. I mean, it's been around since like the 70s, so it's a classic piece of philosophy worth knowing about. All right, any questions about what was going on here, what you should be doing before I move on to the future like ours argument? Great. Future like ours. What's going on here? Same basic idea as the first part of the writing assignment. In that first one, you need to explain the argument and explain the reasoning Thompson has behind everything. Here, I want you to explain the argument, explain all the reasoning that Corman has for everything. So, let's just go through Corman's argument real quick. If someone deprives something of a future like ours, then they have done something immoral. Common cases of abortion involve someone depriving something of depriving a fetus of a future like ours. So, common cases of abortion involve someone doing something immoral. You need to explain what it is to have a future like ours, and then and why we should think that it's valuable to have one of these. Then explain the rationale behind premise one, the reasoning for thinking that it's immoral to take away something that is as valuable as someone's future. Then you need to explain premise two and distinguish between common cases of abortion, and other cases that involve future like ours overriding factors. So lots of stuff going on here. What exactly should you be doing and saying? Well, first, if someone deprives something of a future like ours, then they have done something immoral. Start off explaining what it is to have a future like ours. First, what is it to have a future? You will just continue to live until a normal-ish life. Hopefully, live past your 60s, and not into misery, right? You will hopefully have a life full of things, both highs and lows, both goods and bads. But that's what makes part of life living worthwhile, right? You're gonna have maybe some children and some projects and some jobs. You're going to eat lots of food. You're going to have a good time. You're going to have a bad time. You're going to go on vacation. You're going to get depressed. You're going to go swim in the ocean. You're going to, stub your toe. Like those are the things that are part of your future. That's what it is to have a future like ours. It sucks and it's great. And the combination of that is kind of like what makes it like ours, because that's how futures work. But it's also being able to have all of that seems really important, right? Like when you think about people that die young, um it's sad when they died because of a sickness or illness that caused them to be super miserable. But the thing that sucks mostly about when people die young is a lot less of it's something to do with the fact that they just had so much left, right? If an old person passes away from an illness, sometimes you're relieved. You're thank God their suffering is taken from them. And they were at the end of the road already, right? That's kind of the point. Whereas if a young person passes away, they still had so much road left to follow, road left to go, things left to do, experiences left to have, and they didn't get to those. We think as humans, at least, we value those experiences and getting to live that whole road out. And so being able to do that seems valuable to us. I want my future. You want your future. Partly, I want your future to happen to you also, because I see in myself how much I want my future and how I value it. And so by some kind of proxy, I also value your future, because I see that, it matters to you, and it matters to us that our futures are able to continue. And that's part of why we value each other's futures and why we think it's so sad when people's futures are cut short. That's an explanation of a future like ours. Now, the idea of cutting someone's future like ours short unnecessarily seems really problematic. Seems like you're doing something immoral. If you deprive something of a future like ours, man, they had so much room left to flourish. They had so much stuff left to do. And now nothing. And you're the problem, right? You're the one that did that. You took that away from them. Seems like you're doing something wrong. You're definitely doing something disvaluable, right? Something that we are no, that's not of value to society. Don't do that. We don't want you to do that because we don't think it's good. All right. That's basically an explanation of premise one. Someone does something to deprive something of a future like ours, then they've done something more. Premise two: common cases of abortion involve someone depriving something of a future like ours. Explaining premise two is a little bit more complicated than people seem to think when they are writing this. First, what is a common case of abortion? A common case of abortion is a case of abortion that does not involve a future like ours overriding factor, namely cases of things like rape, or cases where like the mother's life is in danger, or like things like that. And I've incorporating this just sort of from the get-go. A common case of abortion is a case in which the abortion occurs because like the reason that the abortion will occur is out of convenience. Having the fetus, like having the baby, continuing to carry the fetus, is inconvenient to the person that's carrying it, right? It's going to make their life harder. It's going to put some pressure on their body. It's going to make them unable to do some of the things that they want to do. It's going to give them a financial burden. It's going to make explaining to people things a little bit more complicated, like, oh yeah, I'm pregnant. Like all of these things. It's going to make you like psychologically more burdened. It's going to like it's all of these inconveniences. They're all going to add up, but they are ultimately inconveniences that become, I mean, in a sense, bigger and bigger burdens, right? That's what it is. That's what I mean. Like, it's not like inconvenience in the like minimal sense, right? This is like a big inconvenience. It's a friggin' burden. But that's the point. Common case of abortion is where you're having the abortion not for a future like ours overriding factor. You're not like in danger of dying, but you are having the abortion because like you're in high school and you want to go to college rather than raise a child right now. Also, though, realize these situations are not requiring that you raise the child at all. None of them do. All that matters here is carrying the fetus to term, having the baby, and give it up for adoption. We're assuming that that's a possibility. So really here, all we're assuming is the 9 months, the 9-month burden, the bodily changes that will occur. That's what we're assuming. Similarly, also, a common case of abortion in this case, we are restricting ourselves to fetuses that do already have a future like ours. That does not mean that that means that the fetus will not be born into a state of abject poverty, right? A state of abject misery, a state where they're just going to live a life that's so awful and atrocious that it's not worth living. Now, I don't know what kind of life that is, right? Lives that aren't worth living are hard to come by. People seem to think at this point that, like, just because a fetus's future life is going to be difficult, somehow makes it not worth having that life. I find that insanely weird. Talk to any poor person, to any homeless person, to any person that is ill and not currently in a state of abject suffering, and ask them if their life is worth living. They're going to be like, yeah, duh. Of course it's worth living. It's life. There's highs and there's lows, man. Like you get by, and life is worth living. Life is worth continuing on because you never know what's around the corner. Things can totally turn around. Things can get great. Sometimes being raised in a difficult situation makes you a better person when you're later on in life. All kinds of stuff like that, right? Like this is the point here, is that a common case of abortion, we're thinking about cases in which the fetus already has a future like ours. That is, if the fetus is allowed to continue living and become a child, it will continue to live a future like ours. Highs, lows, difficulties, successes, good, long, full road life. That's the point. We're talking about those cases. We're not talking about cases in which the fetus comes into existence and, like, because the people around are so poor that they can't even feed it and the fetus dies. No, that's not a future like ours case. So the things with the number 2 here is common cases of abortion. So the abortion occurs because of burden, and the fetus already has a future like ours, meaning that the fetus will live a full road life with ups and downs. That's premise 2. All right. I had to get that all off my chest because people always write this part of the paper as if like it's totally fine to deny premise 2 here, because they're like, yeah, but the fetus isn't going to actually have a future like ours because it's going to be born into a state of abject poverty, and the woman's not even going to want it, and and so its life is going to be hard. And it's like, what are you even talking about? Like, that's not being an unwanted child sucks, does not ruin your life. Find someone that was unwanted as a child. I don't know, like, it sucks, but there are people that are out there, right? Ask them if their life is worth living. I really doubt that they're going to say no. They're just going to say it sucked for a while. Right? Like, the life is still worth living as long as it's going to, continue on and be good. Like, it's not like their life is just like full misery all the time. All right. And then so, conclusion. So common cases of abortion involve doing something moral. Why? Because you're depriving them of a future like ours. This is, I think, really, like, for me personally, the strongest and most interesting argument against cases of abortion, like, in general, because I do really think our futures are very, very important to us personally. And then I do think that the reason that I think that, like, your future is important is because I see of how important my future is, and then I sort of like generalize, and I think like, well, if my future is so important to me, then your future is so important to you, and like, I want to help you be able to fulfill that realization of the whole rest of the road. And then I think like, okay, now I'm trying to generalize this to a fetus. Like, the fetus doesn't even have the ability to like think about how important their life is yet, but it is going to have this full road, and like, if it's allowed to develop, it will have that, like, feel that level of importance. And so like, the fact that the fetus doesn't feel a certain way now about its future life, that doesn't really feel here nor there to me, as like, if it, like, it doesn't really affect the fetus's future like the importance of the fetus's future like ours, right? So that's why this is, like, I think, a really interesting argument that, you know can pull on your heartstrings in a way, and give me like the most pause, because ultimately I do think that this argument fails, and I do think that abortion in lots of cases is totally morally permissible. All right. Moving on from this. Anyone have any question about how you should set this up? Just stop me. Because now, moving to this final bit. Suppose you disagree with the conclusion of the future like ours argument. Hey, I do. Given that premise 2 is true by definition of the common case of abortion, the only premise that can be denied is premise 1. So what is it? Why is premise 2 true by definition? Common cases of abortion. Common cases of abortion involve someone depriving a fetus of a future like ours. A common case of abortion. Abortion kills something. Killing something stops the thing from having a future. Common cases of abortion are cases in which the abortion occurs because of burden, and the fetus already has a future like ours, like, will continue to live a normal full road life if allowed to continue. That's why premise 2 is just sort of set in stone. So how do you deny premise 1? Now, explain how someone might deny premise 1. Describe a situation or scenario in which the moral principle expressed by premise 1 does not apply. Okay. Remember, in order to deny a conditional statement, you need to come up with a scenario in which the antecedent or the if part is true, but the consequent or the then part is false. So this is the stinker, and this is the part that you have to try and explain in the next section, in that, how you might deny this claim. If someone deprives something of a future like ours, then they have done something immoral. Remember, my whole reasoning behind this premise was like, futures matter. And so taking away the future really seems bad. Right? So now, how might you deny this claim? Well, one way is the same way that Thompson did it. All right, what do I mean by that? Well, think about this. Remember back to the example I gave earlier about like a hospital situation. Hospital has finite amount of resources. Lots of people are ill in a hospital. But imagine if we took all those resources and focused them on one person, we could save their life. But all those other people then would be SOL, right? Like they wouldn't get what they needed. Maybe they wouldn't all die, but they'd be ill and sick and feel awful. And but we spent all the resources to save one person's life. Well, if that one person had, a right to life, then maybe they deserved all that stuff. No, like one person's right to life does not somehow already, just because they're at that hospital, does not give them a right to the entire hospital's resources being spent on them to save their life. Because that person doesn't have a right to the hospital's resources, right? The resources of a hospital is supposed to be like for everyone that's at the hospital, right? That's how hospitals work. It's like how like governments work and stuff like that. We pool together lots of resources so that everyone can try and be helped in certain ways. Now, the same idea I think goes here, right? Like, given this sort of same similar story, when we're talking about a future like ours, a future like ours is like a right to life. It's a very important, very valuable thing that we all hopefully have, right? All, those of us that are not going to die tomorrow or, really soon. You just have a future like ours. Like you don't know about it, right? You're kind of just guessing that you really have one. But like, there's a future path of your life that will go all the way until your death. And it will have highs and it will have lows, and you will have, you will get married and you will have children and you will get divorced and one of your children might die and you'll get in a car accident and your parents will pass away and but you'll also like, have lots of sex and do drugs and have a good time. Like all of these things. That's you have that. It's a good thing. Do you have a right to that? Well, as long as it continues to happen, doesn't seem like it's a good thing for anyone to take it away from you. So if anyone just like stops that thing, like like cuts it short, like, killing you, that's a big bummer for you. And for everyone else, it's like, hey, that shouldn't have happened. You shouldn't have stopped that guy's life. But now imagine a situation in which your future is dependent on something else that you do not have ownership of or a right to. So, like, imagine a situation. Imagine you're in the situation of the violinist. Imagine you're sick and your kidneys are failing. And the only way that you can survive is if someone lets them plug into you, or someone donates their kidney. I mean, this is like a real world thing, right? Imagine you have a future like ours, but only if someone gives you their kidney. Do you have a right to their kidney? No. Are they morally obligated to give you their kidney? I don't think so. It would be morally a great thing. It'd be really good. It'd be so nice of them to give you their kidney so that you could continue living your life, your future like ours. But the path from you and your current future like ours situation has to run through them, through something that they have control over and a right to. So their ownership of their kidney is the thing that they sort of have to like give up to allow for you to then have that future. And they have to go through the process of, suffering surgery and losing a kidney, which it's totally fine to lose a kidney. If you have one kidney, like you will live a normal life. We have two kidneys just in case of kidney failure in one kidney. But that's like something that doesn't happen very often now because we don't eat as much garbage as we had to eat when we were, hunter gatherers. But yeah, like you're in this situation, that's kind of the point. It seems wrong to deprive something of a future like ours. when that future like ours is the thing has it, and depriving it is like unnecessary. But it's not necessarily wrong. I mean, not necessarily immoral. It's not as clear cut, at least, to disallow something from taking something that it doesn't already have a right to in order to perpetuate its own future like ours, if that makes sense. So in a situation in which you need a kidney in order to continue living your future, and you've got someone that's a perfect match, and they're like, no, I'm not going to give you my kidney. So they are thereby depriving you of the kidney and thereby depriving you of the ability for you to continue living a future like ours. Have they done something immoral? If if your initial thought is no, why? Which is that I think my feeling is no. They haven't done anything immoral. And that sort of explanation there that I've given you is the exact same explanation that Thompson is trying to give in her argument, where she's saying something like, look, the fetus doesn't have a right to the body, even if the fetus has a right to life. Fetus's right to life goes through the body that it's inside of. Right? You have to have the right to the thing that you can then use to get to the thing that you would have had otherwise, right? In order for it to be sort of wrong for us to like take away that right to life. So like removing our connection to a connection to the fetus is not actually violating the fetus's right to life. It's just removing the fetus, like the fetus doesn't have a right to the thing, to the body, to the thing that it needs in order to actually be able to perpetuate its own right to life. So the same kind of thing is going on here, and hopefully this explanation has made it a little bit clearer for you if you didn't understand that before. And that's sort of how I think the best kind of case for denying this kind of claim, right? And so you can generalize on my example. You don't have to use my example if you don't want to, but the point here is to like come up with a situation in which you're depriving someone of a future like ours. In this case would be like you're depriving someone of a future like ours, like you're not allowing them to continue living their future by not giving them your kidney, right? That is depriving them of their future, but by depriving them of something that they don't already have a right to take or to in some sense. Their future is only dependent upon something else that they do not have a right to. And so, of course, in the same situation, like according to Thompson, it'd be really nice of you to give you a kidney up because their future, right? That's a very valuable thing that they could then live on. But it's not something that is required of you, morally speaking. All right, that's how you can deny this argument. That's how you could deny premise one. And I just went into a long explanation there, and hopefully you understand it and can try and regurgitate it and then try and clean up everything that I've said, because I said a lot. And you don't have to write a lot. And really what you should be doing is just trying to get the core idea there down there written out and make it as clear as possible. I highly recommend using the Writing Center if you have any trouble with grammar or with things like this. It's really useful. Using AI software, as long as you're using it to like clean up stuff that you've written, is a great idea also. It helps catch grammar mistakes. But do not just put these prompts into the AI thing and like have it spit stuff out. It will just give you wrong answers. So you really have to already understand all of this stuff to even like put this prompt into an AI thing and then get spit out an answer and then like read it and then be like, oh, it just gave me a bunch of false gobbledygook. Like it'll sound good on first read, but I will know immediately if it's just like false claim after false claim. So you have to like know all of the truths, and you can use you're welcome to use the AI generators like ChatGPT to help with your writing process. That's something that like I feel like not enough people are saying right now. These are really exciting tools that we're all going to get to use in the future for forever, right? Like when they invented spell check, none of you remember that, right? I'm a terrible speller. Thank God for spell check. um, but yeah, like these tools are going to be great, so feel free to use them. Just there's a difference between using a tool and like letting the tool do the work for you and like then just claiming that work as your own. That's not how that works. Right, you can't like yeah. So I hope that that all helps. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to stop the share, or not the share, the recording now, so that if anyone has any further questions that they didn't want to ask while it was recording,